Good evening and welcome to Capital Connection, where we join the dots to give you the big picture for business in Africa. I'm Godfrey Mutizwa. On the agenda today, the smartphone is driving Africa's digital revolution. Samsung, iPhone and Huawei may be household names, but what about transition? The little-known Chinese manufacturer commands a 30% share of Africa's smartphone market. So why are African companies not designing and manufacturing smartphones from scratch? Our panel will give you the answers today. And then in Youth Africa, a couple of bearded entrepreneurs is talking facial hair and grooming. And in a report on Africa's growing sovereign debt, we are asking the question, should we be concerned? But first, the glimmer of light for South Africa's latest unemployment figures is that youth unemployment dropped just under 1% to 52.8%. Otherwise, official unemployment was pegged at 27.5%, while using the expanded definition of unemployment, that rate crept up to 37.3%. Now, a country's sovereign debt shows how much more a government is spending more than it is getting in revenue. And there are increasing signs that debt levels are becoming unsustainable for a host of sub-Saharan African countries. In 2017, there was a debt binge, with some African governments borrowing at 10 times the levels of the previous year. Tassa Misubia filed this report on a potentially rocky road of debt defaults.
Sovereign debt is a minefield. In 2016, international creditors discovered that Mozambique had hidden more than $1 billion in currency loans from their balance sheet. The consequences were severe. 14 donor countries immediately froze aid to Mozambique. The country's growth plummeted 3.4%, and the local currency lost half its value against the dollar overnight. It was a brutal lesson for careless fiscal policy management. Economist Roberto Tibana, one of the delegates at a 2-day conference held in Johannesburg this week with the focus on sovereign debt and the dangers it can hold, joins us.
They take loans on behalf of the people, you know. It's not for their pockets. Well, they may pocket some pocket them, but it's not for them. They are not running their households. They are running the country. So they have to be transparent. They have to go to the parliaments, tell the parliaments when they submit the budgets that they are proposing to take those loans, and have the parliaments to agree with them or not to agree, send them back to do the homework, come and give all the explanations, how sustainable, how responsible, for what purposes, how do they think the country is going to be able to pay. Because at the end of the day, when the country cannot pay, it's the disgrace of the whole country. It's the people who are going to suffer. The country is going to be sanctioned, and it's not going to have access to the international markets to do the development that people want.
The conference reflects an increasing concern that African governments are overextending themselves in their loan commitments, making them highly vulnerable to the mood swings of an uncertain global economy. In good times, countries blessed with mineral wealth and high prices for commodities are often tempted into more loans and don't think about tomorrow. But when resource prices fall, as they do, the debt can quickly become unserviceable. Sovereign debt is priced in dollars, so when the oil price is riding high, the currency of fossil fuel producing countries is usually stronger against the American greenback. But when the commodity price falls, so does the currency, and the debt commitments become immediately exaggerated by a weaker local currency. It is at this point that many governments default on loan repayments, resulting in penalties and increased debt.
Yes, oil is the big story, oil and gas in some African countries right now. But the price fluctuations of these primary commodities, it's not new. It's been there for many, many decades. And countries are supposed to learn from this. And there has been quite a lot of advice about this. The key story is that when you have a good harvest, you should know how to keep some for when the bad harvest is there, so that you can finance yourself through the bad harvest.
The Gambia, Mauritania, Mozambique, Congo-Brazzaville, and Cabo Verde have the 5 highest debt-to-GDP levels in Africa, revealing that they do not produce enough to pay back their debt for the year. This results in loan defaults. Loan defaults create more interest and perpetuate the levels of debt. spiraling debt levels out of control. If debt is not managed responsibly, it can quickly destabilize a country, leading to protest, violence, and increased poverty for the population. When debt is handled with care, it can act as a stimulus for the country's growth. Fasimi Subia, CNBC Africa.
Joining me now are the co-founders of the Bearded Brothers, Vizole Kwanda and Takura Chimbuya. Gentlemen, thank you for coming in, because now I'm thinking you are advertising an interesting product, hair care for beards, and yet both of you are started out with professional qualifications in other fields. Can I start with you?
Yes.
How did this come about?
So this came about with me trying to address my own problem, which I had when I was trying to maintain my beard. And these problems were an itchy beard, my beard was dry, it was rough, it was brittle, and was falling out. And I also had some ingrown hairs. And I had to solve my problem,
yeah.
And I came up with a solution.
And how has been take up, and how hard has been the journey?
It's been a very interesting journey. I can't say it's also been tough at the same time, because we're managing our professional relationships, yes. Personal relationships at the same time.
Yeah.
And take-up has been phenomenal since we started.
Yeah. You know, coming to Vizole, you are an accountant?
Yes.
By training, or is your role to keep a check on the numbers, or are you also involved in the development of the product?
Well, part of it. So that's the whole idea behind this brand, where my brother is teaching me some of the skills which he comes with, being the engineering ones, and then I'm teaching him the commerce ones.
Yeah.
But from a numbers point of view, our target for 2018 was one. You just double the customer base.
Wow.
And
where is this? Is this in Zim, or is this
So
all
we
around
currently
the
have geographical presence in 5 countries: Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Namibia, and South Africa.
Wow. And
year to date now, we've increased the customer base 7-fold.
Sure. 7-fold of a low base, or 7-fold of a very good number?
7-fold of a good number.
Of a good number?
Yes.
Are you able to share that with me?
Maybe in the next interview.
You're still growing. All right, yes. Because the next question I was going to ask is, when you come into the stock market, everyone who comes here must tell us when they're coming to the stock market. Let's talk about the future.
Okay. So we see ourselves in the next 5 years as the preferred male grooming brand in Africa. We'll use one country as an example, Zambia.
Yeah.
I spent 2 weeks around December in Zambia, understanding the market, the challenges which are there.
Yeah.
You'll find yourself seeing a bearded person which are using something like cooking oil.
Oh, really?
And you ask yourself, what can we do?
Wow.
And as it stands now, we started in 2018.
Yeah.
We have 2,000 bearded brothers who we're chatting with through Beards of Lusaka on Facebook.
Sure. Wow.
Yes.
And talk to me about the products. Exactly what do you guys offer? Because I see you've got a brush there, and what is that? That looks like some liquid stuff.
The beard balm.
So we have a beard oil.
And I'm wondering if you can help my
Definitely. We do not discriminate on any types of beards.
Yeah.
So we have beard balms,
all
beard
beards
oils.
matter.
Huh?
All beards matter.
And then we have the accompanying brushes and combs as well.
Yeah.
And we manufacture and distribute the products as well.
So where is this being done?
So we were very practical about what we're doing. And we converted one of our rooms into a lab, which we manufacture the oils in. And we sourced them from one of our reputable suppliers who sourced them from 130 African countries.
Sure.
Correct.
And where do you source the material that you use in the product?
So that's our supplier with the oils, and they also give us the certificate of...
what, this is African oil, you're saying?
These are all African sourced oils from 130 African farmers.
Any imports in that?
Imports, I guess, from some countries like Morocco, Ghana.
Okay, but all African, authentically African?
African authentic oils.
Yeah. Is this a product that's suitable for the black beard? Let me put it that way. Do you want to take that up?
Takura can take that.
So we made sure that we're not discriminating between race and between skin types and hair types. And specifically in the oils that we put, we're making sure that the oils actually cater to all types of hair, all types of skin, and that's our brand.
And it's working?
It is working.
Do you have any evidence that your product is going multiracial?
We have evidence through our client base on our social media sites. We encourage people to post their beards, and they do that.
They do?
Yes.
Beards?
Yes. Beards, all beards alike.
Hashtag beards, hashtag beards. So is there plans to take this outside of the continent?
Yes, but we believe direction is more important than speed, and we've been trying to fully understand how the African market works. For example, part of our success has been because of e-commerce, thanks to what they call in the streets parcel ninja, where we've managed to get our products into different parts of the country within the shortest period of time.
Yeah.
What they have is with their courier system, for example, they have a live bidding system which guarantees the most affordable delivery charge, which is passed on to the consumers in the form of low selling prices.
Absolutely. I can only thank the bearded brothers. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
On the other side, after the break, we're talking about smartphones, increasing wealth, cheaper smartphones, and Africa's rapidly growing population, which is driving demand for handsets. And we're asking the question, why isn't there an African champion on smartphones? Welcome back. Joining me now to discuss if and why African companies should design and manufacture their own smartphones is in Johannesburg. I've got Arthur Goldstuck. He's the Managing Director of World Wide Worx. Thank you, sir, for coming in. And he's also the Editor-in-Chief of Gadget. In Lagos is Chika Nwobi, the founder of Decagon Institute, and in Kigali, Rwanda, Alex Ntale, the CEO of Rwanda's ICT Chamber. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today, for your time as well. Let's begin, perhaps, if I can start with you, Arthur, and ask the question that I've been burning to ask. Do we have smartphones that we can say are African design, African made?
There's no truly African smartphone in the same way there's no truly American smartphone, because all American smartphones are manufactured in China. And most African brands are branded locally, designed locally in terms of what specs go into the phone, are also manufactured in China. There are factories like Mint, for example, in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg, that assemble smartphones, but from components that they import from China. So that's the closest we come from to a truly manufactured African smartphone, an assembled smartphone. I'm
going to come back and ask you about the American example that you just used, but give me the big ones in Africa in terms of brands that people recognize.
Transsion is the big name, although it is based in China, but it's regarded as an African brand because they have such a strong presence with Techno in Nigeria, for example. Okay. Everyone who uses a Techno thinks it's a Nigerian phone or an African brand, but in fact it's a Chinese phone. In South Africa you have the Mint factory that sells about 7.5 million smartphones.
Really?
And they ship about 400,000 phones a month. A massive success story.
Sure.
And then you have Mobicel, which is also a big success in South Africa, producing smartphones, but at the entry level, and you could call them mid-range phones, but that come in at entry-level prices.
Right. So when you say they are African smartphones, are you saying they are designed in Africa?
The branding is created here, and the design of the phone in terms of the specifications of the phone, what goes into the phone, is all formulated here. And then the blueprint is sent to these Chinese factories that actually manufacture them. In fact, what you can get from companies like Qualcomm, for example, is a blueprint for a phone that you then brand yourself, and you commission a factory to manufacture that phone for you. And that's typically what happens. Most of these African branded phones are in fact what they call a reference design that's created by Qualcomm or by MediaTek, which is a Taiwanese-based company. And they allow any manufacturer or any brand to take their reference designs and have it built as a phone under their own brand in these Chinese factories.
Absolutely. Let's go to Lagos. Chika, I remember years ago there was a Nigerian-made car, if I remember correctly, and I've seen a few examples of it. Why have we been so late on the smartphone front? Because I have not heard of a Nigerian-made designed smartphone, or am I just ignorant?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the truth is that the Nigerian market is a very large market and is really targeted by a lot of the global brands that have economies of scale already. I think Alex talked about Tecno, which was sort of the challenger brand that really grew market share over Nokia and Apple and Samsung. And people see that brand as a Nigerian brand in a sense, but it isn't. I think it really has a lot to do with economies of scale on the manufacturing side. I think a big part, and if you think about, so what is really in a smartphone, right? I think, like Alex talked about, like a smartphone is really like a chip, so the hardware design, which most of the phones in the world basically have 2 or 3 like original like chip designers, and then you have like the actual like assembling of it, and then you have the software, the operating system, which is pretty much dominated by Android and iPhone, the iPhone operating system. And then you have all the other things that run on top of it. And I think this is where Nigeria really should be playing a lot more aggressively. So the apps, the services that run on top of the smartphones. Yeah. So over the last few years, Nigeria has actually been quite active in that regard in terms of the apps and the services that come on top of the phones. But I think there's a lot more room for improvements in this regard.
Absolutely. Alex, from Rwanda, we know Rwanda, of course, is a place where ICT is certainly a sector that the government has targeted. And recently, with Mara Corporation, which is a Rwandan-based company, disclosing that it wants to invest as much as $100 million here in South Africa to design and manufacture smartphones. In terms of development of that smartphone, where is Rwanda?
Unfortunately, I may say that I don't know the value where they're at right now in terms where the particular company is in the process. Yeah. However, I want to reiterate what Chika just said, that let's look at the value chain. Okay, so there's the design, the R&D that goes in, but then when you evaluate the value chain of, say, let's take this example of the smartphone market. Where is the most value being created? Is the value being created in the hardware or rather in the software? And I think where I see Africans being able, where the ground is leveled is at the end on the software part, so the apps development, because we can leverage the hardware as a platform to build new solutions that are then going to create value for the citizens, that actually becomes a competitive edge rather than trying to compete on the manufacturing. Now, that doesn't mean that that the manufacturing doesn't make sense, but it does, and it requires deep pockets. Deep pockets from the sense that the example the earlier gave in Nigeria, where you have Tecno. Tecno is still the dominant in Rwanda. They have a factory in Ethiopia, and it's a Chinese-owned company. They are assembling in Africa, and for a company to be competitive, you will need the same depth of capital. Sure. And I think that's where companies like Mara Group that are setting up with access to over $100 million can really begin to make a mark. But if you don't have that kind of capital, it becomes really a challenge for you to even develop a brand on the continent. Yeah,
and in terms of app development, where are you in Rwanda?
So on app development, there's quite a number of apps that are up now that we're using. So let's start with the digitization process has heavily started with the government services being digitized. So most right now, there's more than 100, close to 100 services that are now digital. So citizens can access the justice system, they can access their land titles, access land transfers if they're buying or selling land. And that is that has heavily helped on increasing the number of apps that are being used by citizens. But then also the private sector, the young entrepreneurs, developers have come up with new solutions that are also on the market. So from mobility solutions to e-commerce platforms that are taking market share, to things that where you'd expect some of the big players to be to have a niche in the inventory, for example, CRM, content, customer CRM systems and platforms that are used by B2Bs. You find that entrepreneurs, because of understanding the local problems, they are developing custom solutions that are designed for customers that are here, that things that they can afford, as opposed to importing what is coming from the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Arthur, if I can come to you, because now I think I've got a clear idea. Yeah, it's not like we are not there. We are there, but perhaps we are not there in the presence that we need to be. So on app development, I want to put the same question to you. Where are we? And then I want to add another question to that. What about tackling the issue of an operating system born in Africa?
I think both Chika and Alex make very good points about the value chain in ICT, and especially in apps. South Africa's got a thriving apps environment, numerous developers, superb apps, world-class apps, in fact, and it's led by financial services, the banking industry in particular. They have some of the best banking apps in the world. So we certainly do compete with the best, and we also show the way in many of these apps. Also in South Africa as well as across the continent, particularly in Kenya and Nigeria, there are numerous incubation hubs, incubators for startups, what they call accelerators, to speed up the development of startups. All of these are developing numerous apps that are intended to solve African problems. So they're not designed to compete with the social networking apps of the world, but rather, for example, in Kenya in particular, numerous apps to enhance agriculture and the ability of farmers, especially small farmers, to compete on a national and international platform.
Absolutely. You need to answer the question about the third operating system in the world. Why can't we do it?
I don't think there's a need for a third operating system. If someone comes up with it, if someone
fourth, because there's also Microsoft, right?
There's, well, in terms of smartphones, it's only Android and iPhone, really. Microsoft's Windows for mobile has pretty much vanished from the scene. There are no more phones.
That's how difficult it is.
That's how difficult it is. But also, because they were only really in one brand, which is Nokia, they weren't able to compete globally. And you even see with the iPhone and the iOS market share, it's a fraction of Android. But because the iPhone itself has got such a powerful market, it's a viable operating system. But were it not for the iPhone's own strength, the iOS would disappear
would go as well.
So there's always room for a new operating system if someone can spend the time and come up with something better. But for now, there isn't really a justification to spend the R&D and the time to develop a competing system just for the sake of competing.
Absolutely. Chika, if you can wrap, do we need one? Do we need an African operating system? Do we have the capability?
I think that's a very interesting question. When you talk about the capability, you see a big part of whether we will build an operating system or even really start to produce phones or other types of technology. One factor is our capability. How many world-class software engineers do we have in Africa? How many people are graduating with real capability to build software? So we have recently launched a software engineering institute. That's what Decagon is really focused on increasing the number of world-class software engineers that are coming out of Nigeria. Now, if we can increase that number, then we then look at the next issue, which is what type of problems are those software engineers trying to solve? I think there are three types of problems that software engineers have been trying to solve. One is problems for Nigeria, problems from Africa. Two is problems for other parts of the world. And then three is sort of the co-joint, problems of Africa and the rest of the world. Now, we've limited ourselves to solving only African problems, and there's a problem with that. The whole of Africa only had $500 million in venture funding last year. Israel alone had close to $1 billion. UK had about 2.5 billion, and America had 82 billion going into funding the software engineers building products. So if all of Africa has so little money that is going towards solving just African problems, we can try and increase that. By the way, that 500 million was 50% more than the year before. So it's actually growing, right?
Okay.
So we can try and increase that, but we should also have our engineers looking at solving problems that are both African and international. This is what the Israelis are doing. By doing that, it sort of expands the money that is funding the problems that we're solving. So it gives us more runway to get to the end of solving these problems. Absolutely. So I think this is really where we should be looking at.
Absolutely, and I'm glad we've put out the question there. Let's see if someone is going to take it up and you see one day that third operating system made in Africa. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, and that's all the time we've had for our program today. Thank you for joining us, and you can join us again every Monday and Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Central African Time. Good night.